Hello, Alexander. We're going to take a look at all three of your posted experiments. Yours was one of the projects that was corrupted, so I'll do a video of the first three here. So it may be a little bit long, but we'll talk about all of them. So here we have your rule of thirds. Let's move down. There's emphasis. All right. So to start off, I always kind of look at, in terms of an overview of the project, just whether you're following the instructions, whether you're able to handle the parameters of the assignment. Being able to follow a set of guidelines is a skill. I mean, not everyone is able to break down a set of instructions and then be able to be creative within that. So for this project, we're starting off at a distance. We're establishing an environment for a structure or a building, and then we're progressively getting closer to it, but not just arbitrarily. We're cutting the distance in half. We're also using some visual prompts in some cases that are very highly structured, like line and shape and texture, but also some that are a little bit more subjective in the environment, portrait, as I see it, that kind of stuff. So it tells us a lot about where you are with your work. It tells me where you are with being able to follow instructions. It also tells me a little bit about your experience with photography. Do you have a point of view already established? Is photography something that you use as a passive experience? I would say on this first image, it's an excellent job. You've right away have incorporated something that a lot of photographers don't do, or early photographers don't do, and that is the use of a foreground shadow that leads us right into where you want us to go. So that's a very good strategy. Whether you did that, hopefully intentionally, but what it does is it moves the eye. You're actually guiding us to where you want us to be. And that's an excellent thing. It shows that you're looking at the entire picture plane, all of the edges of the frame. Photography is subtractive. So we have the whole world, and then we reduce down to the things that we want our audience to see. So by basically framing what we want the audience to see, we can guide them through the image and kind of get them to what's important, the thing that we're actually trying to show them. I would say just one thing, this element right here, this sort of out of focus twig, is kind of not participating. And I might have, noticed that, or if I had seen that, I might have even kind of bent it out of the way and kind of tried to get it out of the way so it wasn't in the shot at all. That's what I mean about subtractive. You're always looking to reduce down to the absolute minimum there. This is a good idea. When you're entering into a structure, how do you organize it? How do you kind of get to a composition at different distances? So at this distance, at the first distance, you're really kind of far away. You're working off of that corner. I deliberately wanted people off the corner because that tends to lend itself a little bit better when we do that environment shot. But I didn't give you any sort of visual kind of structural ideas here other than portrait. And so here, what you've done is you've squared things up, which is great. And you have tried to create line work here. The building is not necessarily all that architecturally interesting. It's just a series of stacked squares and such. But what you've done is you've taken those series of stacked squares and formalized them in a way that gets them to look like they're repeating and that kind of thing. If I were to say anything, I would say that, the time of day is a little unfortunate. It's just, midday, and it's broad lighting. The lighting is just right in the front there. If there was lighting on the other sides, things like that, it would have been a much more dramatic looking image. You would have had more shadow areas happening there, and you know, a longer shadow here. You would have had more shadow areas maybe up in here that separate, and it would have been a much more dynamic looking image. But the strategy you used here is excellent to break down the composition as it is. Here, what's kind of strange is we didn't move much closer here. I'm not sure if you just had a, you know, you were at a long lens or something like this, but it doesn't appear that you've moved any closer on this next shot, which we wanted you to do. You're using line here. I can see you're looking at a line, right? We had other lines but you should have been right up in here where this blue is, probably. But you're looking at line, and so you're focusing more on that possibly, and forgot to move up. I don't know. But you know, you want to kind of move up progressively as you get closer, because here now we jumped all the way real close. So it kind of is almost too dramatic at that point in the image. So when we get these visual prompts, a lot of students are suddenly more comfortable because it tells them what to do. You know, line, you're looking for lines. Shape, you're trying to find shapes. Color, you're looking for a juxtaposition of color. You can help yourself out by giving yourself these sort of guidelines. When you're out there and you're working and nobody's telling you what to do, by offering yourself this to say, I'm going to explore this via line, or I'm going to give myself a little bit of a guideline in terms of looking for textures or something like that. It just helps you to focus is all. It doesn't limit you, but it does help you to focus. Right here, this is what I was talking about, different times of day. So you happen to just be on another side of the building here, and you're getting a better angle of the shadows. And so what's happening is you're getting this beautiful variation that's going on here, rather than just this blast of light that's hitting the side of the building. And this kind of quality of light, it takes what's otherwise just sort of a dull looking gray beige building and gives it some character. It also sort of, I don't know, indicates what's not there. So this is what photography is really all about. You could structure it up a little bit better. You know, you're a little bit crooked here. That's a hard thing to do. A lot of times we do this in post in Photoshop. We're not using Photoshop, but that's one of the things we might do. Here, the backlight's a tough thing. Try to avoid this at all costs. In the future, don't have the sun directly in your image. It's a challenge. I've seen photographs that sometimes work with it, but most of the time it's not a good idea. If you had moved yourself over this way just a little bit, so the sun was right back here, you would have had a much better construction of the light there. That would have been a better idea. So as I'm looking through here, it looks like you've got some good things. You got some other areas where it didn't quite happen for you so well, which is typical. I think you're about where you need to be on this first project. Some of the images show some real promise. Other show a little bit of sort of novice error, which is, you know, that's what you would expect. You would expect you're exploring. You're gonna try to make some images that work and don't work. I would much rather you explore and try to make things that work, and then try something like this, which is doing a good job. I'm gonna hopefully get you to learn more about later, something called depth of field, which will help you to do things like make this out of focus and this stuff in focus, so that you can control just exactly the depth of what we see, not just the space of what we see. All right, so let's move to your rule of thirds. Now, rule of thirds gets us into a whole nother set of structures, which a lot of times this opens up the doors for students, because suddenly they now have this real structure to work with. And for some, it's liberating, right? For some, it's helpful, and others, it kind of locks them down. It is used a lot in graphic design. It's used a lot in filmmaking. It's used a lot to sort of quickly, very structurally put together a composition that you know is going to have a certain sort of balance to them. Rule of thirds, I call it this one balance, because even though we have not sort of centralized compositions, everything's kind of off to the edges there, you still should try to achieve a balance. So looking at this, what we usually see when students are first trying the rule of thirds is a focus on either the horizontal rule of thirds placement or the vertical rule of thirds placement. It's sometimes difficult to concentrate on all of them at the same time. And so it looks like that's what we did is here in an image like this, you've got this position pretty well, and you've got this area pretty well. But right over here, this kind of cuts the composition in half. We sort of forget, I mean, or sort of overlook that part of it. This stuff isn't easy. If it was easy, we wouldn't have to do a project about it. We could just say it and then move on. So this is a bit more of a challenge here. This is not bad. I think we have some emphasis going on here. We have a little bit more of an emphasis here in there. We're lacking a little bit of the vertical quality on the rule of thirds, but at least you're placing the horizontal elements in a better way. Whoops. So something like this is actually creating, as we know in the next composition, it's actually creating something that we would consider to be undulating rhythm. So you got this pattern that kind of goes like this and like this and like that and backward and forward. Rule of thirds, I don't know if it's a great example of rule of thirds, but I can see where you're placing things presumably in those locations. These are subtle versions of rule of thirds. You know, I think that in some cases you hit it on the head, which is great. In other cases, they're sort of questionable. And in other cases, they're fantastic because you're able to use the structure without it like hitting you over the head, like something like this. You're using the structure here where you've got the horizon fairly well placed. You've got this structure right here, this element that's fairly well placed. The road takes you to a place which is almost where the rule of thirds is. So this is using the principle, but it's not sort of like, you know, punching us in the face with it. So I think this is a very good example of the use of rule of thirds, not just showing us the rule of thirds. Here we've got the horizon too much in the center, pretty straightforward. Again, you've got a pretty good sense of the horizon right here. It kind of gets away from you, but here you got a good vertical. It's a nice balance between the two, the horizontal and the vertical. You can see how it helps you to create, you know, a kind of visual balance on how things move. Explore different times a day. I cannot emphasize enough for everybody to explore when we do these photographs, various times of day. You know, photography is light, and just like a painter in pigment and paints and things like this, imagine if the painter used one brush and one color. Now, that could be interesting for an experiment, but just one brush, one color is ignoring all of the other possibilities and the subtleties, not even variations of that one color, just that color. When we're using just one type of light, one time of day, within just a few minutes of itself, we're limiting ourselves to one color, no variations of that color. And, you know, camera control is a whole other thing. That's like variations of the brush. When we use various times of day, that's like our palette. That's like different colors, that's different textures, different tones, all of that. So explore different times of day, explore different perspectives, and eventually we'll get to exploring cameras controls in other classes. This is a very good example of the rule of thirds, where you're doing a good job of placing the horizon. You've got the road going there. It's all pretty good. So again, I think you're pretty much where you need to be with something like this. So some of them are working, some of them are not working. I was just looking down here at at the guides here, where it's showing undulating 1, undulating 2, undulating 3, and things like that. But this is the rule of thirds project. So I'm like, why did they put the undulating and alternating here? I'm not sure what that's all about. Anyway, you're about where you need to be again on this one. Some of them are working well, some of them are sort of questionable. I think you're right about where you want to be. I mean, you're hitting home runs sometimes, and some of them are foul balls kind of thing, to use a baseball analogy on that. So let's take a look also at your last one here. That would be the rhythm. Excuse me. Here we are, rhythm. So this is where we're establishing the movement through the repetition of elements that guide the viewer, not just, through balance, but in a direction. So we have the 3 types of rhythms that we're exploring here. They're not the only types of rhythms, but they're the specific ones that we're addressing for this project, which is alternating rhythm, undulating rhythm, and progressive rhythm. These are just 3 types of rhythms: alternating, which we described in class, back, forth. Progressive rhythm, which moves us in a direction. It's usually getting from escalating to diminishing, like the spaces between the objects are getting smaller or bigger. It usually means it's going back into space, like depth. Alternating rhythm, it tends to be flat. It sort of makes a 2-dimensional space. Undulating rhythm moves us in multiple directions, kind of thing. That's how I would describe undulating rhythm. And it looks like you have it fairly well established here. I would say this is pretty good as far as leading lines, and you're creating this undulating rhythm, kind of moving us back and forth and back and forth. That seems to be working out fairly well. This may be questionable. Yeah, I could see, you're sort of establishing a little bit there. You're almost getting into what's called dissonant rhythm on this image. And dissonant rhythm is a whole other type of rhythm. And that's where there is this sort of pattern or rhythm that's happening. There is this sort of repetition that's happening, but it's not necessarily in any predictable pattern. Like we don't know where the next rock would logically be outside of the frame here. And it's not necessarily moving us in a direction either. So it's kind of just sort of moving, but it's not moving us in any one particular direction. I suppose you could lead your eye down this way just a little bit, but not really all that dramatic here. Undulating, yeah, I see you're experimenting with the water. This is a good one. For progressive, this is almost getting toward more like undulating, because you're moving in this direction, and then you got the water moving the other direction. But I could see how you would identify this as progressive rhythm. That's a good one. This is also, as we know, we're exploring the use of line. This is the leading line example as well. But yeah, you're progressively moving down using the repetition of these shapes. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. That's a pretty good example. However, we've got this bullseye thing going on here. Remember, rule of thirds and all of the other stuff. We don't want to let that go. Coming out of the corners here, it gives us only one place to be. And while that's good for things like graphics and logos, it's not real good to establish movement and dynamic, a dynamic composition that keeps our eye moving around the composition. Here, we're just we wind up here in a vortex almost. It just kind of sucks us in and we don't go anywhere else. This one is much better, as you can see, in terms of movement. I'm not talking about just, there's nothing wrong with the previous image. I'm highlighting where it's leading us. This one moves us in much more of a progressive direction. And you're using the rule of thirds a little bit better here. The balance of it's a little quirky. However, you're using the rule of thirds pretty well. Yeah, that's an interesting use of rhythm here to try to get the progressive rhythm. I like that you've put this in here to try to break it up a little bit. I'm not sure that it's placed very very well. It could probably go in another place. In other words, moving your camera to position it, maybe in one of those rule of third lines or something like that would have improved it, I think. Okay, so alternating rhythm. Let's see what we have here. So this is more progressive rhythm. This is definitely progressive rhythm. This is not alternating rhythm. Progressive rhythm moves us in a line. Because you're shooting this at a diagonal, what's happening is the spaces between here, space between here, space between here is visually getting smaller. And so that means it's progressively getting smaller, progressive rhythm. At the other hand, you've got over here where it's kind of flat in space and they're moving back and forth like this. That's alternating rhythm. Alternating rhythm is an excellent sort of way to flatten out a space and make it feel more graphic. We use it a lot, again, in graphic design. We use it a lot in filmmaking to kind of organize a space and create this almost stage, two-dimensional stage-like feel to things. So that's definitely alternating rhythm. This is not alternating rhythm. So it's interesting. It seems like on the one hand, you understand it because you showed a super duper example of it here, perfect example of it. And then here, it's not at all. So I'm wondering which one you really think is the alternating rhythm, because this is not at all alternating, but this is absolutely alternating. So I'm wondering, are you guessing, or are you sure? And you're just sort of like, well, maybe this one is. I'm not exactly sure where you are on that, because you have some of them that are definitely not, and some of them definitely are. So it's either one or the other. This and this cannot both be alternating rhythm. So anyway, again, maybe you are about where you need to be. I do want to clarify with you. Perhaps we can run into each other in class, and I can ask you. We can talk a little bit about alternating rhythm and kind of clarify that a little bit. I do want to be sure that that it's clear to you just exactly which is which, so that you're not guessing. I don't want you to guess. I want you to know, because you'll want to be able to use it to your advantage. You'll want to be able to use these things as part of your visual language, however it fits in to it. This stuff can seem kind of dry, I guess, but when you use it all in combination, it's poetry. It's how we speak. It's how we communicate. So that's what I have for you. I do appreciate your patience. We had some technical errors there for a bit, and the video is probably 20 minutes or something like that. But I hope to see a lot more of your photography, and we will see you in class. All right. Bye-bye now.